And now, the First Alert Storm Team, live from the 13 Now digital desk. This is Tropic Topics.
Welcome to the first episode of Tropic Topics, and we're going to do this weekly, so make sure that you do join us weekly. Sometimes it'll be myself and Kristen, sometimes it'll just be Grace and Kristen, or any combination of the three people you see here. And occasionally, if we need to, hopefully we don't need to much this year, but if we need to, we'll pull in also some emergency managers and local officials and things like that. But we're focusing heavily on our area because we wanted to give you guys something that was a little more specific. So before we jump into all of the dirty details of everything, let's introduce the two lovely ladies that you see sitting beside me here. We've got Kristen Kennedy, our new morning Met, one heck of a first week, I might add. And we have Grace Thornton, who not as new as Kristen, but our new weekend Met as well. So let's start things off with Kristen. You're coming to us from Little Rock, but not new to the tropics per se, being a Georgia native.
Yes.
And you were in the Macon market. So give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, so my first job, I was in Macon, Georgia. That's middle Georgia, and I got a lot of tropical activity there. In fact, when Hurricane Michael was hitting this area, I was still tracking that through middle Georgia, and it was still a Category 1 hurricane when it came in through our viewing area, which was really significant, especially for a more inland location than a coastal location. So it did cause a lot of damage there. We were tracking it for 19 to 20 hours of nonstop coverage and just the impacts that we saw across our area. I then moved to Little Rock, Arkansas. I got a lot of experience covering tornadoes and severe weather there, even some snowstorms, which thankfully I don't think we'll have much of here.
Definitely not.
But I've just continued to follow the weather, and I enjoy the challenge of forecasting, and that's really why I love what I do. And hopefully we don't have to talk about a lot of hurricanes this year. We'll see, but if we have to, of course, we're going to keep you up to date, and you'll get the very latest from us.
Awesome. Thanks, Kristen. And we also have Grace Thornton here with us. And Grace, a Baltimorean, right? Is that how you say
Baltimorean?
it? Don't sell yourself short. She is coastal, if you can say that Baltimore is coastal. Now, not a whole lot of tropical activity up that way, but more familiar than somebody, say, from like Iowa.
Yes.
With the tropical activity. So let's hear a little bit of background, because you're not new to forecasting either, much like Kristen coming to us from another forecasting job, but a little bit different with Grace.
A little bit different. For the last 3 years, I worked as an agricultural meteorologist, so I forecasted for commodity crops like coffee, sugar, cocoa, things like that, all across the world. So a lot of these global patterns I kind of like know more about, lots of like monsoonal stuff. I was really interested, but I really want to be on TV, so I took a TV job, and here I am. And yeah, I don't have a ton of tropical experience, but I mean, there's a fair share of subtropical systems that's made their way over to Baltimore. I remember Hurricane Isabel when I was a kid, and I definitely remember like Michael here because I was, working as a meteorologist then, and lots of historic storms as well. So
awesome.
Yeah, it's all very interesting.
So thanks to all of those that are tuning in with us, and I do have the chat section up right in front of me, so if you do happen to have a question that we don't specifically cover here, then we will be happily try to get through that. But I will question you, or at least give you some background here, is to say that we're not going to do individual city forecasts. We just don't have the time for it. I always get asked, what about Bluntstown?
When's
what about
it
Bristol?
Hit my city?
Yeah. When is it going to hit such and such location? What are we going to see in such and such location? We just don't have the time to do that. If we had to go through everything in the Panhandle, specific where you are, what's going to happen to you, that we would have hours and hours and hours of coverage, and then people, in other locations wouldn't be as inclined to want to be entertained by this. And first and foremost, that's what we're trying to do here. It's been a couple of years since Hurricane Michael. We understand the severity of it. I went through it with you guys, and we're not trying to take away from any of that experience, and we understand the shock of even just seeing tropical maps that are 3-4 weeks out that show a storm near us. So we get that, but this is meant to be more of a discussion for you guys so that you can kind of see what we're thinking, what we're doing here at News 13, and how we're feeling about certain things. So we're going to try to bring a little bit of levity to it, and we're going to try to have a little more enjoyment with this tropical season. Not that anybody enjoys the tropics, but it doesn't need to be this scary thing. I think as long as we are prepared, and that's what we're trying to do here, is prepare you guys that we will be able to get through this season together, and that's the goal here, is to do all of those things. So let's jump right into it. We do have some stuff to talk about. Now, not a ton out there at the moment. The National Hurricane Center has highlighted that there is a 20% chance of development over the next 5 days. So pretty low, and we'll go into the reasons for that in a minute, but starting off with the water vapor here. And you'll notice a whole lot of the oranges across the map, and the oranges giving us dry air. So that's what that is. And then across the Central America, a big bright blue spot showing up there just south of Mexico. That is actually an area of interest in the Eastern Pacific. And I think a lot of what will eventually play out in the Gulf of Mexico is going to have to do with that system. That's also why I think the models are really shifting back and forth, is because they don't know how to handle what that output looks like. But at the current moment, we're not talking about a whole lot. So you'll notice the now red blob there, just to the south of the Bay of Campeche, and the overall flow going back up toward the Bay of Campeche. So the model's trying to figure out what's going to happen with that, and the development of the Central American gyre. We also have plenty of dust out there, because that's typically this time of year, early in the season, we talk about Saharan dust, and this is an output that shows the current Saharan dust across the Atlantic basin, and that usually really squashes activity this time of year, which is why we don't usually talk about a whole lot in July and June, because we've got just too much dust and shear out there. But with our tropics heating up just a touch. Yesterday I had the meter at 2.5, so a new product to us here, creation actually yesterday on our tropical worry meter. This is part of the levity here for this show, and what we're trying to do. It's just kind of take you guys back. So obviously social media and long range, that's to the point where we're talking like, hey, there's no area of interest, there's no storm. Yes, the models in the long range are showing something, and a lot of the hype people out there are probably pumping something up. But before there's an area of interest, really there's not a whole lot to talk about, other than just saying, yeah, okay, the models are hinting at something pattern-wise, but it is just in the long range and social. Now we've moved into a topic where there is an area of interest, and then obviously once we get a low pressure to form, then we'll be tracking that storm. So the Central American gyre is the next thing to talk about here, and this is the old area of interest, but I'm going to toss it to Grace while she explains what the Central American gyre is.
All right, well, you have it pretty laid out for us, that area of, those arrows going around and around. That is the development of a very broad area of low pressure that we call the Central American gyre.
Gyre,
I keep
you
saying,
got it. Yep.
I keep saying gyre. It's like GIF and GIF, I think. But anyway, so around this area of low pressure, as you can see, towards that arrow, you can see a lot of where some of our areas of interest are. It's basically just an area that helps in development of hurricanes. And at this time of the year, our Atlantic region is not fully really prepped. We have wind shear out there, dust, so we're not going to see tons of formation coming off of the west end of Africa, So right here is kind of the better conditions where you could see areas of interest pop up, or possible development of an area of interest, or tropical storm. We even have I think those areas, we have 2 areas of interest, I think, over to the west of Mexico right now. So it's really just seeing how everything works together, and over to in the Western Caribbean, it's much warmer there. So kind of all the ingredients that you want for a hurricane could come together in this area, especially during the beginning of hurricane season and the end of hurricane season. So this is kind of where you want to correct your attention to if you're looking for potential development this time of year.
Nice. Yeah, just to add to that just a little bit, typically the pattern that sets up when we get gyre formation is we get a high pressure that builds in a subtropical high in the Atlantic, and then some kind of trough that develops on the western side of Mexico, and that helps to create that wind out of the north and west, so you get that broad circulation. Now, everyone remembers Michael, actually a gyre development. Not all gyre developments are Michael.
Yeah.
Most of them, in fact, are not. Majority of the storms that come out of gyre are broad, sloppy, multi little areas of spin that kind of rotate around each other, and it takes a long time for them to develop. Now, obviously, Michael being a little bit different because Michael moved into a perfect environment. What I can say, and Kristen can explain a little bit more here, is that the environment out there right now is not perfect. So take it away.
Yeah, it's just really messy out there right now. As we've been watching all these models trying to form and trying to show it. I mean, Ross and I, we talked about it, I think, day and night over the past several days. We keep saying, okay, well, the timing's pushed back, or, you know, GFS and Euro, they're not agreeing. They're pushing it a little bit further off towards the west. There's not a lot of shift. That subtropical high is going to impact it a little bit. And there's also still an area of high pressure just hugging the west coast of Florida right now. And so that's also going to kind of help steer the system and keep it a little bit further off towards the west. Obviously, right now, it's not very well put together. It's gonna take some time before it even does develop, if it does develop. I still think it's gonna be pretty messy if and when it does develop, but the models are trending that it's going to stay more so towards the west, and that again does have to do with the highs that are building in, and that's really going to help steer the system away from us. But it's certainly something we have to watch, because there's kind of two different paths that these systems can take. They can take more of a westerly path and stay along the Gulf Coast, or they can go a little bit further towards the east and really start to impact some areas of the Florida Panhandle.
Right. So I think what we were hinting at earlier, as you see here in this graphic, that area of interest that is to the south of Mexico, kind of moving into our area of development. Now, the models have been really slow with developing anything early next week, but I think that there's several different solutions here. If we get something early, I think that the gyre is probably the overall steering pattern down there, because we are going to have high pressure and control across the Gulf of Mexico. So to me, I think that if we have something develop early, it probably is going into the Yucatan Peninsula or into Mexico, and we're likely not seeing much of a solution outside of just extratropical moisture in the Gulf of Mexico. Then there's some other possibilities that at the moment seem a little more out there. Now, the GFS typically gives us a good insight into those outliers, and usually is the one that's like, hey, all the other models are doing this, I'm going to do something different. And
very untrustworthy.
Yeah, and it always makes you go, well, these are all agreeing.
You're like, what is the GFS doing?
Why can't you just agree so that we can have a little more confidence in this forecast? And then I think when the GFS finally does jump on board, you're like, okay.
You're like, okay, now we kind of know what's going to happen.
Yeah, you're like, this is a reality. We can kind of put a little more confidence into this. So I think that the GFS is a little out to sea at the moment, but the GFS solution, not scary. It is actually a storm that I think would probably be subtropical, or at least there should be named subtropical. Now, I've seen some stuff in the past that was subtropical and it got a name and they called it tropical storm, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, okay, this isn't
not that
fully tropical. This is subtropical. This is being influenced by a jet. This is not an asymmetric storm. So even if it were to be further east, I think it's in more shear, and that we'd be talking about some much needed rainfall. So most of the time when you're talking tropics, you want to check the temperatures. And yeah, the Gulf of Mexico is warming up. Now, it's not hot per se, but it is warming up. Typically, we look for 27 degrees Celsius. So that equates to about 78 to 84, and that's going to be what will sustain tropical development. Once you get above 84 degrees Fahrenheit and that water temperature, then you start talking about, okay, there's fuel there for this to go into and really claim. But out there now, most of the water's running anywhere from about 80 to 81 all the way into the central Gulf of Mexico. Now there's a little bit of a warm streak there, which is what we refer to as the loop current in the Gulf of Mexico. That thing can sometimes really get things cranking when the water is coming out of the northern Caribbean and catches and attaches onto that loop current, probably the most famous being Katrina. Katrina came across the peninsula, grabbed the loop current, and after being a weak Category 1 across the peninsula that really no one remembers, but Katrina hit Florida first, it grabbed onto that loop current and within 48 hours was a Category 5 hurricane. So it can happen. You can talk about the loop currents, things like that, but that's one of those unforecastable kind of situations that isn't going to happen all too that often. So what is out there? What fuel do we have? That would be, Barron creates a lovely graphic for us, and this is called the Hurricane Intensity Forecast. So it gives you kind of a situation of what shear is out there and what the waters do look like. And the green corresponding with highly unfavorable, the red corresponding with highly favorable. So Kristen, why don't you talk to us about what is favorable, what is not favorable, and why?
Well, right now you can see on the map that really most of the Gulf of Mexico is not looking very favorable for development, and the reason why is basically what Ross has just spoken about, is because the water temperature is really not as significant as what we look for tropical development at this time. There's going to be a time in the summer when those colors get a lot more enhanced, but anywhere closer where the water's a little bit more shallow, it's a little bit warmer out there, that's where we are watching for potential to see a little bit more development, so closer to the coastline, and especially further off the coast of Mexico and really in through the Pacific and closer to the equator. That's where we do watch these systems that are already starting to kind of pique our interest at this moment. So that's why we're going to be watching this start to build up. And I've been looking also at some of the models with, I believe it's the Euro has been showing where there's better potential, wave potential at least to form, and that's certainly been in the western Gulf of Mexico as well.
Yeah, so as we move this forward, you'll notice where our area of potential development is. You see that red starting to show up there in the Bay of Campeche, which is why I think as we go through at least next Wednesday, most likely what we're talking about is an area of low pressure developing relatively close to the Mexican coastline in the Bay of Campeche, and probably going to be influenced by the overall broad circulation that Grace laid out for us as the steering current, because the rest of the Gulf is just unfavorable at this moment in time. So it doesn't mean that something tropical can't develop in the Gulf. It just means if something does, it does not have a great environment. So it's going to be broad, it's going to be sloppy, it's not going to be something that we could go, oh my gosh, this is going to blow up into, you know, a Category 1, 2, 3 hurricane. Most likely you're talking about weak depression or subtropical system, or just a storm that maybe doesn't get named but is a big broad circulation, and those can be impactful. We've had some non-named systems come along the Gulf in the past years that dropped lots and lots of rainfall, and then obviously we all remember Harvey in Houston. That was a Category 4, and much like the complaint of this area that we get forgotten by Hurricane Michael, most everyone does not remember that Harvey as a Category 4 hit Rockport, Texas. So not Houston. Rockport, Texas is what got rocked by Harvey and the eye wall. Unfortunately for Houston, set up in a feeder band, it sat there for 5, 6, 7 days and dropped just unheard of amounts of rainfall. So those are all realistic solutions to broad sloppy systems, is that they're slow movers and they can drop a lot of rain, but typically we're not going to be talking about a whole lot of wind causing any kind of damage or anything like that. So obviously through next Wednesday, the concentration is going to be in that area where they have the 20% chance of developing right there around the Bay of Campeche, and obviously in the Eastern Pacific, where you also see the red there, and the other area of interest, as Grace mentioned, that gives us the potential for those two to interact. So I think that's why the models have been
Yeah.
all over the place, is that you're dealing with the interaction of the Eastern Pacific, you're also dealing with the interaction of the gyre, and then the potential for some kind of development out of the Gulf of Mexico. So that's why myself included really try to highlight, stay away from the social media pages that are posting deterministic runs. And what I mean by that is one model run of the GFS or
It's
the
like
Euro.
7, 8, 10 days out.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
way too far in advance.
You're talking about at that point in time, not only does everything have to go right up into the point of storm genesis, but then you also have to have all of these errors that have been magnified by the time steps going forward have to also be right for the storm to then play out the way that those model runs are showing, especially when you're talking 240 hours plus. So at that point in time, it's 10, 12 days from now that we're talking about those storms. So just stay away from them, because A, it's just insane to believe any of them, and B, they're clearly just trying to get
They just want
clicks.
attention. They want
Yeah.
likes. They want interaction. They don't actually want to educate,
No.
really. They just want to draw you to their page, and it's going to ultimately create panic and not preparation. We want to do the exact opposite.
Right. I think that's very well put. So we'll go into what we have here as far as the June setups and typical, and with what we've already been talking about, this is right on cue. So we're talking about the gyre development potential and Northern Caribbean, as well as the Gulf of Mexico, being the areas where we could potentially see stuff develop in the Atlantic and the Atlantic Basin this time of year. And really where we watch is for, unfortunately, just to the south of the Panhandle and the Florida Peninsula, because that is kind of the hot zone in June. Most of the storms weak, but there have been 6 Category 1 hurricanes, or even 1 major hurricane to make landfall in June. Now, obviously, we're going back on our records here way, way back. So the odds of that actually happening, pretty low. And for all the reasons we've already laid out. You got shear, you got dry air, you've got cooler water temperatures. So you really need things to go right if you're going to get a strong storm to make landfall in the U.S. in June. Most of these systems end up being broad and not all too impactful. But out of the statistics, stuff that develops and right on cue, right in the area that we're looking at, typically develop in the Bay of Campeche and typically go into, guess what, right where the models are showing that it potentially could go, Texas, the Mexican coastline, or possibly even as far east as Louisiana. But usually stuff that develops there, because the subtropical high is building in this time of year, is going to continue to stay off to the west and across the central Gulf of Mexico. Now, the other solution is the possibility that a cold front comes in and you see that the jet on A there solution being pulled further to the east. And then you've got stuff that develop around the Yucatan Peninsula or south of Cuba that end up getting pulled toward the Florida Panhandle or the peninsula. And again, that has to do with the subtropical high in the Atlantic, the periphery of that high, as well as the ability for cold fronts to still come in to the Gulf of Mexico and interact with these systems do tend to pull things toward the Atlantic East Coast and the Florida Peninsula. So things in the past that have happened around this time, now obviously Cristobal last year, Hermine I think was the last early June formation to hit this area, other than Alberto in 2018. But I always ignore Alberto because Alberto wasn't really a storm. I don't know why it got a name. I think it had like 25 to 30 mile per hour gusts. It was ridiculous. I mean, it hit, I think it made landfall officially in Panama City Beach. But it was not a storm. So, those are the type of things that we look out for this time of year, and those are the general tracks. So, Grace, let's walk us through this map for us, or I should say graphic.
All right, well, this is the official hurricane outlook as given to us by CSU and NOAA. For NOAA, we're expecting named storms. Well, last year we had a very active season. We went all through the alphabet, extended into the Greek alphabet. That is actually going to change this year. We have another list of names that we will, dive into if we do run out of names eventually. So, but we're only expecting about 13 to 20 named storms, probably, somewhere in there. Lots of those numbers are pretty similar, anywhere from like 12 to maybe 15, and 14 being the average. For major hurricanes, that's when you start to see those,
Category 3s and higher.
Potential for that is way lower, likely to only see an average of 3 of those, maybe 3 to 5 if we're, not lucky, but lucky. And then just regular hurricanes, anywhere from 6 to 10 is what NOAA is thinking, but likely the average would be about 7. And obviously these numbers can change depending on what kind of hurricane season we do end up seeing in the future.
And those numbers, they changed, right? The average, did they update?
Yes, we're now officially on the new climatological data, new 30-year period,
Okay.
yes. So before this year, in fact, we were on the previous 30-year period, which had a reduction in number of storms, number of hurricanes, and major hurricanes by about 1 or 2.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't a massive shift, but we have seen the average increase a couple in all categories. And typically, these long-range forecasts I'm not a huge fan of, mainly because you look at these numbers and you're like, oh my gosh, we're going to have 20 named storms.
Yeah.
And it's like, but where are they going?
Yeah. Some of them could be the fish storms. They're
Right.
at sea and they don't impact anything.
Right. I mean, we've already knocked A off the list, and A didn't touch anything.
Yeah.
It didn't affect anyone. That's the same kind of thing. The next one's Bill, and that could potentially be our storm in the Gulf. Now, it could also be a subtropical system that develops on a front in the Atlantic between now and next week. I mean, that's a possibility. And I think 5 of the named storms last year were weak systems that developed in the mid-latitudes off the northeast coast in the middle of the Atlantic. So they weren't impactful whatsoever. But they got a name and they got a number and they were in the year's total, and inevitably got us into the Greek alphabet. Now, hopefully last year is nowhere near what we're talking about this year, because we ended up with 30 named storms last year. So hopefully that's not the case. And also these numbers, they don't give you any indication of U.S. impact either. So we've had active seasons in the past. It's been a while since active seasons haven't impacted the U.S. So hopefully, since we are expecting at least average or slightly above average this year, that these systems do miss the U.S. entirely, that would be great.
Yeah.
We would love for the U.S. to get a break, because Louisiana had a tough time last year.
Louisiana was getting hit over and over. It was like every time something foreign was like, those people in Louisiana were like, please skip us.
Yeah.
I know. I think we were doing our prep for Tracking the Tropics. Just a little plug here for Next Star Nation. It's the other show, not this. We're Tropic Topics, but Tracking the Tropics is ran out of Tampa, and they do a show every, Tuesday, right? They do a show every Tuesday, I believe. We were doing our prep for that, and I think a Louisiana Met was like, I think it's the Atlantic's turn for,
like, stop coming to us.
for these storms. I don't think Louisiana wants any more storms. And, we don't want any storms. Nobody wants any storms. I mean, North Carolina's had a tough time of it the last several years. The only place that has seemingly gotten relatively lucky is the Florida Peninsula. Has missed a lot of the major hurricanes that have gone just off of the coast there. So, we'll see. We'll see how the year plays out. But hopefully these numbers, even if they do come true, they don't impact to the U.S. And it's pretty rare to have back-to-back seasons where we have major hurricanes make landfall in the U.S. It does happen, but it is relatively rare. We're talking about less than 10 back-to-back seasons where major hurricanes have made landfall, most recently happening in 04, 05. Those were the last times that we saw back-to-back seasons of major landfalls. Well, excuse me, 17 and 18, we had Harvey and then Michael. So those are your back-to-back seasons there. And then 19, believe it or not, even as active as 20 was, 19, we did not have a major hurricane make landfall in the U.S. So we didn't have back-to-back seasons. Now, last year we did have a major hurricane make landfall with Laura, Delta, and now I believe they upgraded Zeta to a major hurricane. So we had 3 major hurricanes make landfall last year, all in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah.
So again, hopefully Louisiana can miss out on some storms. Hopefully everyone misses out on the storms. But talking about active periods, on average, the first Atlantic hurricane happens after August 2nd. So we are early in the season here, and our main period of tropical weather, that happens from August through October. Mm-hmm. So that's when we're really talking about our hurricane season. And for the majority, 90% of storms happen in that 3-month period. 90%. So outside of that, you're talking about very few storms. So it really is August, September, and October that is very, very worrisome in the Atlantic, and that's when you'll see us in here, and we won't be as relaxed as we are today. We're probably going to be a little more tense,
on edge.
We may have some snacks in here that we might just be nervously eating, that kind of stuff. But hopefully this season is much better. So I am got the chat here, and I do want to thank Spencer, who is running things behind the scene before we get to those chat questions. I haven't seen a whole lot of questions in here as far as comments go, but if you do have a question or something that we haven't covered, please put it in the comment section and we will get to it. If you want to ask something about myself or Kristen or Grace, keep it within reason, and we will probably get back to you on that as well. So I'm going to open up the floor here to anybody who wants to add a little bit, but I do just want to commend on all the graphics that you see here, not the actual weather model graphics, but all the graphics that you see
all of
here.
this stuff.
Yes, all of it, literally everything. This was all Spencer's doing. He created it like this week because, I came to him and I was like, hey, I want to do a show. And
He's like Superman.
Yeah, and I want you to make us look really good. So can you do that?
I think he blew us out of the water.
Oh yeah, he's phenomenal.
Out of the water with our water graphic.
There you go.
Yeah, the open, man, like the open. Whew.
Well, if you like the open, stick around for the close.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
I haven't seen the close either. So let's see here. If you guys have anything you want to add, jump right in.
Well, I don't really think I have anything.
No, you're not going to do a rap for us? You're not going to do Tropic Like It's Hot?
Well, I didn't prepare my lyrics today, but maybe next episode I could drop some verses
we
on
have a
you
question
guys.
from Chris Golden.
Oh, there's a
What does it
golden
say?
question. What does it say?
It says, Ross, some people say that the Euro is the only model to follow. How does that work? What models are the best?
That is a good question. Now, I will say there are multiple models, and by multiple models, I mean there are too many to list.
Too many.
Like, there is pages and pages of models, including hurricane models, which are not the Euro, believe it or not, and they are more accurate than the Euro, believe it or not, but we have to have a storm first. So they are much higher resolution, and they're boxed around specifically that storm once the storm does develop, which is, again, going back to the social media nonsense that is long-range deterministic runs. That, what are we talking about here? We've got models that literally are mapped around a system that give us a much better view of what potential impacts can happen, where the storm is going to go, how the storm is going to interact with this environment, all that kind of stuff. Why are we looking at our 278 of the GFS or Euro, things like that, and then trying to pick apart them like that? It's just complete nonsense in my mind. So yeah, the Euro gets the name the king for a reason. It is a very good model, but it is not always correct. I think back to Dorian, I believe it was. Dorian, for those that don't remember, hit the Bahamas and sat still for over 30 hours over Grand Bahama. The Euro had Dorian coming across the peninsula, re-strengthening in the Gulf of Mexico, and then making landfall in the Florida Panhandle. And that got people to panic thanks to those social media pages. People 10 days out were going to Home Depot and Lowe's and buying material here because of what the Euro showed. Like, that's nonsense. Like, let's not do that, people. Let's actually trust those that know what they're talking about, that can get into those nitty gritty in the models, and let's see what's going on before we go panic buying. And I think that's another good thing to hit on here about being prepped before hurricane season, before we get those model runs going, before the storms form, is just have those materials on hand. So if one of you two want to go through that real quick, some of those materials that you may want to have.
There just was a tax break on some hurricane materials. Things like, I mean, pretty much anything you would need, maybe camping.
Think of like, you're going camping, or you're going to be away from your house and all of access to like everything for a while. What would you need?
You need
generators,
generators,
food,
things
hygiene
that are
supplies,
non-perishable.
Of course, you want like the wood to board up your windows and houses. Maybe always having some of that in a garage or a storage unit. That way, when it does come time to do that, you're not having to rush to the store, dealing with higher prices because there's a high demand and a short supply. And always having like gas on hand too. Now, I would maybe wait a few days before something were to hit before just storing some gasoline around. But just anything that you can think of that you will probably want that you won't have access to if a storm were to severely impact your area. And that's, those backup generators are great, mobile charging ports, really just, there's so much that
you would need if you couldn't live in your home, basically.
Like, what would you bring with you? Like Grace said, if you're going to go camping, like if you're going to be stuck outside, you would want a lot. So just having it ready and on hand, keeping that in a closet or a basement if you have it, great ideas.
Add to that a little bit, solar chargers, like a little Coleman portable where you have the little store propane tanks. Can't tell you how much a hot meal is worth when you haven't had power for a little while. And then obviously water, lots and lots of water. The suggested amount is 1 gallon per person per day, and you want to have enough food storage for at least a week. So that's canned goods that can be opened and not need to be cooked, that you can eat for at least a week. Now, obviously, this is in the case that a storm is coming toward you and you are deciding to stay. And I know many in this area will not stay for probably a lot of storms, even the weaker storms, just for personal reasons and probably a little bit of PTSD. And you're not alone, because I have it as well. So I too, if we have a category 3 or higher, I'm going to be talking to Nexstar and going, hey, let's do this from a different location. Let's not be in Panama City this time. So that will be, you're not going to be alone in that sentiment. But cash is the last thing that you definitely need. Cash is king when there's not power anywhere else. So you want to make sure that you have plenty of cash on hand, that you can buy goods and things like that. And you definitely want to be able to at least survive on your own for at least 72 hours. Especially in the case of Hurricane Michael, you likely might have been stuck at your home for 72 hours before you could even cut down enough trees to get out. I think one of my best suggestions that I saw from you all out there was to have electric chainsaws, and I think that came straight from Hurricane Michael experiences where you had to cut your way out from all the trees that fell. So that's probably not a bad thing to have on hand, as well as what Grace and Kristen have already mentioned, that those supplies to have on hand here. So I was going to go through a little bit of the setup and go through some of the scenarios, but I'm not seeing a whole lot of questions here, which I think that's good. I think we've probably covered a lot of things. So if you guys...
Early.
Yeah,
it's early. And so hopefully between now and next week episode, next week you will have the lovely Mets beside me. I will actually be out of town, most likely. And
As long as that thing doesn't develop.
Yes, as long as we don't have a storm coming right to us, I will probably be out of town for next week's episode, but it will air on Thursday next week, not Friday. We did a special Friday episode here to give everybody a little extra time in preparation, as well as it timed out pretty well, because yesterday at this time, if we had been doing this, we would not have an area of interest, and we would have had a little bit less to talk about. So for content reasons alone, it was good for us. But obviously, the less content we have to talk about, the better. So this may be one of the longer episodes that we end up doing throughout the year. Hopefully, if we have more activity out there, that we would end up needing to expand a little bit further. But just wanted to give you guys a little introduction into what we're going to do and the discussions that we're going to have. And keep those questions rolling in if you have any questions, because, again, it's going to be one of the three of us, or all three of us, or two of the three of us that do these discussions from this point forward throughout the season. We're going to be here with you every week through the season. So we have ordered up a tall task for ourselves and extra work just so you guys can stay prepared. So that is going to do it. Spencer, why don't you tropic like it's hot and roll us out of here?